Good morning and Happy New Year. Welcome to our latest edition of United Way for Southeastern Michigan's What's the Word Wednesday. My name is Audrey Walker, and I thank you for joining us today. We're having an important discussion on what's coming up in 2022 legislation. Between the challenges to voting rights across the country and debate over economic policies still happening at the federal level, it can be confusing to try and keep track of all the state and federal policies in flux right now. So thankfully, our friends at the Michigan League for Public Policy are here to help us sort things out. The MLPP works to promote racial equity, economic security, health, and well-being for all people in Michigan through policy change. United Way and MLPP work together on issues that matter to working families, like increasing access to tax credits, promoting civic engagement, and educating people on how policies affect them. So we're glad to be joined today by two individuals from Michigan League for Public Policy, External Affairs Director Alex Rossman and Senior Policy Analyst Julie Cassidy, who will share updates and insight with us on what we can expect to see this year. As a reminder, the last 10 minutes of today's conversation are reserved for questions. So please leave your questions in the Q&A box if you're watching on Zoom or in the comment box on Facebook. Now, before we get started, let's learn a little more about our speakers. So Alex Rossman joined the league staff in 2015 as communications director. He handles writing, editing, messaging, media relations, and social media for the league to help ensure the work gets the attention it deserves. Prior to joining the league, Alex worked for Democratic Central Staff for Michigan Senate for almost 10 years, serving as Deputy Communications Director and previously as Press Secretary and Communications Advisor, helping draw attention to the important legislative issues facing our state. He previously worked in communications for the Michigan chapter of the Nature Conservancy as well. Alex holds a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration and Sports Management from Aquinas College, where he also ran cross country and track. So we're excited to have Alex join us today. And Julie Cassidy joined the league as a policy analyst in 2017. Before that, she spent 14 years working as a legislative analyst for the nonpartisan Senate Fiscal Agency, where she specialized in health, energy, and environmental issues. Julie also has extensive volunteer history of strategic planning and building community partnerships related to local environmental stewardship efforts. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Social Relations from Michigan State University's James Madison College and a Master of Arts in Public Policy, also from MSU. So welcome, Alex and Julie. We're so thankful to have you joining us today and can't wait to hear about the information you have to share with us.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for having us. Thanks for the acknowledgement that I was in much better shape when I was younger and running cross country and track. I also do our government relations work at the league and some of our lobbying. So to start us off, I'm going to just talk a little bit about kind of the political landscape in a broad sense, and then Julie's going to get into some of the policy priority specifics that the league is most interested in, and I think all of you are very engaged in as well. So a couple things of note relative to the coming year that's getting underway in the state legislature. First, there's actually 4 vacant seats currently in the Michigan House of Representatives. A few representatives ran and won special elections for state Senate. One Republican representative unfortunately passed away recently, and then a Democratic representative was recently elected mayor. So there are currently 4 open seats in the House. Which means the current Republican majority in the House is down to 55 to 51. So that's just important context that essentially if something kind of squarely partisan is going to pass, they really need every single one of their caucus members to kind of stick with it to get it passed, or need to work across the aisle even more than usual. So just important to keep that in mind. The other big thing that I think everyone is aware of, either how it's impacting you locally in your own voting in the coming election year, or in policy advocacy work as well. But the other big news is redistricting. And that the maps have been finalized both for state House and Senate, as well as the congressional maps. Also, as you may be aware, there have already been some legal challenges filed to the maps from Black lawmakers. There's some concerns about the new maps being drawn and their impact on representation of Black voters. So they're still in flux a little bit as they're litigated, but for the most part, there are final maps that we are assuming until we hear otherwise, that those are going to be locked in for the coming election. And we're already starting to see the ripple effect of those new maps with some changes in our congressional delegation, with Representative Brenda Lawrence retiring, Representative Rashida Tlaib planning to move. I believe Representative Dingell is also planning to physically move to the new districts. So some physical movement there. And then of particular note at the state House and Senate level is the new maps are pitting several sitting incumbents against one another in the coming election. So as of right now, and again, there's probably going to be some physical movement and address changes to move to an open district if there is going to be a primary amongst incumbents. But right now, it looks like there's going to be 4 House primaries and 2 Senate primaries where incumbents either from the Republican or Democratic Party are going to go against one another. So 2 Republican incumbents or 2 Democratic incumbents drawn into the same district. And so the context of that is that it's going to make the political sensitivity of policy a little higher than usual, and a little different, where, you know, when we think about the election year and the political side of the policy discussion, we think about wedge issues and what are kind of standard partisan divides between Democrats and Republicans. But with the new districts and some of these primaries, you're going to see individuals within the same party trying to differentiate themselves with one another. So you're going to see, frankly, Republicans trying to out-conservative one another, Democrats potentially trying to paint themselves as more progressive than their counterparts. So it's just going to be a little more interesting, really unlike anything we have seen before. And that added piece of kind of intra-party competition and challenges on different issues is going to make, I think, the issues that the league works on and that the United Way for Southeastern Michigan works on potentially a little more challenging there. I did want to share because like all of you, I'm trying to get more caught up on redistricting as a whole and its impact. And I did want to flag that Bridge Michigan is having an online panel discussion later this month that is free and open to the public, where they're going to have a few representatives from both the Voters Not Politicians campaign effort that initially got redistricting passed, but a few political consultants and pundits to kind of examine where things are at. And then finally, with it being an election year, with the impact of redistricting, I think really the big areas of policy focus and the most likely areas of progress are going to be in continued spending of the state's American Rescue Plan dollars that we have at our disposal. One supplemental was passed in December with strong bipartisan support that invested about $1 billion in COVID school testing, rental assistance, teacher recruitment, different things like that. And then there are several supplemental bills that have passed either the House or Senate. And we are hearing that those are most likely to be the first things to move in this new legislative session. And then the other big area of focus is going to be the state budget. They have to pass a state budget every year. So that will be probably the big area of bipartisan cooperation and negotiation, because I don't think anyone wants to head into an election year with a government shutdown under their belts. They all want to find a way to get through this budget cycle. I think it will likely be finished up sooner than in recent years, where we have gone all the way up to the October 1st fiscal deadline. I think we're likely to see a budget, at least from the legislative standpoint, wrapped up earlier in the summer, so that legislators can be out campaigning and working on their elections. And then the last thing I wanted to share, the political landscape's changing all the time. And so myself and the league really try and keep all of our partners and supporters as up to date as possible. And so I actually host a weekly update on Fridays at 11 a.m. on the Michigan League for Public Policy's Facebook page called Yays and Nays. We actually have a link with a sign up that you can sign up for updates, but it also has the information on it. But each week I discuss what happened in committees and on the legislative floor that week, what I'm hearing on the ground. And so that's a good way to kind of stay up to date because it is always changing. So that's a quick rundown of the political landscape. And then I'll turn it over to Julie to get into some of the policy specifics that I know you're all interested in.
Thank you, Alex. And thank you so much to United Way of Southeastern Michigan for having us. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of our priorities for the upcoming year. If you joined this town hall a year ago, you'll find that many of the items and issues that I highlighted back then are still on our agenda. As we often say in the policy arena, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And we have made some progress on some of our important issues over the past year, but we're not over the finish line yet. So we continue to push. And fortunately, circumstances are changing all the time, most notably the availability of ARPA funds right now. And that gives us hope that some of these things will come to fruition eventually. Housing continues to be a high priority for us at the League, for many of our partners, and for legislators on both sides of the aisle. A bipartisan legislative package to prevent childhood lead poisoning has seen some action in the House recently, which is very encouraging. Over the years, we've seen a lot of legislation and appropriations focused on lead in water, and the need for that obviously continues. But we also need to address the fact that the primary source of lead exposure for children is paint in older homes. And this package does that. It also includes some measures to ensure that children who are lead poisoned get the services and supports they need as quickly as possible. These are House Bills 5413 through 5421 and 5423. A number of legislators from Southeast Michigan have signed on as supporters of the package, which is really great. And I think we have a link to a summary of the bills that we can put in the chat so you can get a sense of what they do and follow them through the legislative process. The bills are in the House Health Policy Committee right now. They've already had one hearing, and so we're hoping for another in the next month or two. We would love to see this package move to the full House for a vote and then go to the Senate and hopefully the governor's desk eventually. In terms of housing affordability, we're continuing to seek a robust and sustainable revenue stream for the Michigan Housing and Community Development Fund. This is Michigan's housing trust fund, which hasn't received any funding since 2012. The money that was there a decade ago was very effective in increasing the supply of accessible, affordable housing for people with disabilities and older adults, helping struggling families to avoid homelessness, and completing some critical rehab and repair work to make sure that housing for people with low incomes is safe and healthy. As we know, because of the pandemic, a safe place to live is critical to our health and well-being. So we're hoping that a substantial chunk of the state's ARPA money, ideally at least $100 million, could be used to sort of reignite the trust fund and help advance the discussion about finding a permanent and dedicated revenue stream going forward. Also, as we talk about housing, there's another item we'd like to see funded either with ARPA dollars or through the regular budget process. And that's an initiative focused specifically on some issues adversely affecting renter households in housing availability for them. Through this initiative, we hope to see improved relations between landlords and tenants and find some solutions to combat the stigma that's often associated with renters with low incomes. The shortage of affordable housing in Michigan has been greatest for people living at or below 50% of area median income. A lot of housing measures in recent years have been targeting families earning up to 120% of AMI, or the missing middle, as it's sometimes called. And that's very important, but we do need to make sure that we don't leave behind the households that are struggling the most. Families in this lowest income bracket are disproportionately families with children, older adults, people who face transportation or accessibility barriers to paid work, or people with uncompensated family caregiving duties. And these families tend to face a lot of trouble seeking rental housing. Everyone needs a safe place to live, so we certainly welcome a state-sponsored venue to find ways to ensure that these families are treated equitably and that our rental housing market is serving all Michiganders well. One of the elements of this proposal is being called a risk mitigation fund to encourage landlords to rent to people who have a hard time finding a place to live because of their low income, their credit score, or their source of income, things like disability payments or housing vouchers, other non-wage sources of income. In other places where this has been implemented, there have actually been not very many claims submitted to these funds. So I think that can help alleviate the hesitancy that some landlords might have to rent to families that have experienced housing instability in the past because of their financial situation. And that actually dovetails really well with something else that's been a priority of ours for several years now. And that's a statewide law protecting people with non-wage sources of income, like housing vouchers, from discrimination in the rental market. Bills to that effect have been introduced again in the House and the Senate. So we're very grateful to the sponsors for that. These are House Bills 4553 and 4554, and Senate Bills 254 and 255. So if you'd like to know more about this legislation and be part of our effort to get it passed, you can contact us or the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness, which is our partner who has been leading the charge on this effort. One of the reasons that all of these housing initiatives are so critical, especially now, is that Michigan's population is aging faster than any other states, and we don't yet know the full extent of COVID's impact on our population. Some studies have shown that as many as 1 in 3 COVID survivors develops long COVID, experiencing potentially disabling health conditions and symptoms for months or maybe even years after infection. We just don't know yet. Across the nation and here in Michigan, we continue to set new daily records for infections and hospitalizations, and families continue to lose income, maybe permanently, due to death or disability resulting from COVID. So it's going to be all the more important that our housing stock includes quality, affordable options for families at all income levels and serves our needs throughout the entire life cycle. Some of these things have been league priorities for a while now, and the pandemic has only heightened the sense of urgency to act on them. We really appreciate the partnership with United Way of Southeastern Michigan, and those of you in the audience over the years. We hope you'll continue to stay engaged with us and your legislators as well as we work through this crisis. Build Back Better is stalled in Congress, but that shouldn't stop us in Michigan from doing what we can with the resources that we already have to create something better. So as you advocate for solutions to improve the quality of life in your own community, I would encourage you to maintain a focus on how the things you're fighting for are good for everyone. We know that poverty, food insecurity, academic and employment struggles, housing costs, lead poisoning, all of these things affect families in every county in the state. So it's really important not to play into the sort of zero-sum game makers versus takers framing that some politicians like to use. We need to keep the focus on values and help policymakers understand that many of these solutions that we talked about today involving investing in safe housing, some of the other priorities like expanding the earned income tax credit, making childcare more affordable and accessible. All of these things benefit everyone in our state. So that's really important to keep in mind in your messaging and your advocacy efforts.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Both Alex and Julie, we really appreciate you sharing those updates with us. And we now have some time for questions. So again, if you do have questions, please leave them in the Q&A box if you haven't done so. You had mentioned, big area of policy focus and progress will be on the state's American Rescue Plan. What are some of the priorities within that? I know you mentioned housing, but what are housing initiatives? But what are some priorities you see within that spending?
Well, as I mentioned, a few supplemental bills have passed one body or the other, and right now they do have kind of broad issue focuses, and so there is a $3.3 billion water infrastructure bill that has passed the Senate. The House has passed a supplemental of $368 million on public safety funding. There's another one being discussed on parks investment. And then another big one that we're focused on that Julie mentioned is the My New Economy plan that the governor proposed that has a lot of great investments in the things that our collective organizations care about: childcare, housing assistance, future for frontliners, Michigan Reconnect, those programs to help older workers get skills. So I think those are some of the top tier priorities right now, but there is still a great deal of money that hasn't been designated to any bills in flux yet. And so I think that's the other big area of opportunity, is to advocate for other areas we'd like to see that investment. And I'll see if Julie has any other investment priorities she'd like to raise that we're working on.
Sure. So one of the key components of the Build Back Better plan, which is stalled, is a historic expansion of home and community-based services for people with disabilities and older adults, so that they can continue to live in their homes rather than having to go to a long-term care facility. And unfortunately, that seems to be on hold for right now, but there are some other things that we can do with money in Michigan with our ARPA funds to help expand access to those services to people who currently, can't afford them, or to extend these services to new communities that are currently underserved or unserved. And so I think that's a really important element to keep an eye on going forward.
And, there's been a lot of growing concerns around students not in the classroom for learning time and staff shortages. What do you see happening around education policy this year? Any updates around anything focusing on education, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's an area where there's broad interest, but kind of differences of opinion on some of the specifics between Governor Whitmer and her administration and the Republican-led legislature. I know there's been some discussion and disputes over seat time and having funding tied to how much time kids are physically spending in the classroom. And we've seen, unfortunately, over the course of the entire pandemic, some political differences on schools mandating masks or moving virtually. So there's a lot of substantive policy discussions that are still kind of getting mixed up in some of the political divides around COVID, unfortunately. And need to continue to focus on what's in the best interest of kids, their physical health, but also a lot of attention around mental and socio-emotional health. There is a bipartisan work group in the House of Representatives that was created kind of in response to the unfortunate shooting at Oxford, but trying to look at broader ways, in particular, to help address students' mental health. So there are some areas of interest and overlap, but yeah, it you can kind of see where there's some alignment, and then there are some things that we unfortunately have seen continue to be kind of wide divides politically. Also similar, the unfortunate arguments going on about critical race theory and all the legislation and political time that is being spent on that issue. So there are some kind of big areas of dispute in the schools, around schools and school policy, and so trying to find that area of agreement. And then I think the other thing finally that has come up is, as things have fluctuated between in-person and virtual, just trying to look at ways to kind of promote technological equity, both for schools and school districts, but also households. That not every household has enough laptops or computers for a kid to have their own dedicated computer for school, and not every household has internet access. So I think some of those conversations will continue and possibly be part of ARPA negotiations at the state level.
Yeah, and you touched a little bit on talking about mental health supports for students, but what about, any bills concerning mental health funding or any sort of policies around that as far as being a priority in the new year? Because there's been so much talk about that with students and otherwise, just people feeling a little more isolated and things along those lines.
Yeah, in a broad sense, they're probably the biggest mental health issue working in the legislature right now is discussion of mental health integration with physical health, and how mental health coverage is handled in the healthcare system. That's been a big priority for Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey. And so that, I think, will be another area of continued discussion. And that's an interesting one because there is bipartisan agreement on both sides of the issue. So that's hardest to predict where it's going to go politically. But the fact that it is a priority of the majority leader indicates that will continue to be a focus of that caucus in the year ahead. But would like to have our health policy analyst on to delve more into that issue.
Sure.
But that's another big policy issue on the horizon that is being discussed, and I think will continue to be negotiated and worked on this year.
And thank you for that. And this is a question, just more of a broad question, but what are a few ways, in your opinion, I would be able to engage with my lawmaker? And then are there ways that I would be able to get involved with MLPP to advocate on policy?
Yeah, I think we have shared in the links already. If not, we will shortly. But we have at the League, we have a document of general advocacy tips, kind of independent of one specific issue, so that it's relevant to pretty much every resident of the state and every organization. Some general advocacy tips and guidelines for how to get involved and interact with your elected officials. One thing in particular that is shifted during the pandemic, but is somewhat of positive development, is how much lawmakers are interacting with their constituents online, how much our organizations are doing online these days, and really trying to broaden our ability to connect beyond geographic boundaries. And so lawmakers are doing that too. A lot of them are doing weekly or monthly Facebook Lives and coffee hours and things like that, and just are on social media more frequently. That tends to be a good way to connect. And then the other thing I wanted to share that I'm not positive if we included already, but we have a good document that breaks down the annual budget cycle and outlines essentially who you should be talking to at what stage in the game. And so right now, the governor and the state budget director are working on her budget proposal that will come out in February, shortly after the state of the state. And then the legislature works on kind of their counter budget proposal, and negotiations continue. But we see the budget every year as kind of the best opportunity for progress on our issues, that sometimes it's easier to get some investments to a program than getting a whole new policy off the ground with divided political power right now. So so the budget is really in an important way to engage. And then, as I mentioned, I hold a conversation every Friday at 11 on the League's Facebook page. If we haven't already, we can put my email in the chat. Always looking to connect more with partners or individuals that are interested in working on more legislation. And also final thing I'll lift up, because it's said with both my communications and government relations hats on, is that the power of personal stories and perspectives. You know, the League is a data-driven organization. We have a lot of great statistical information that you can use, but pairing that with something that is more of an emotional appeal or personal perspective is really kind of the formula. So encourage everyone to share their individual experiences or thoughts on public policies. You don't have to necessarily be a legislative expert to be able to have an impact on legislation. And a lot of times those personal stories and perspectives are most valuable in moving some minds in the legislature.
Yeah. All right. Well, we appreciate that. And that's all the time we have for questions today. Again, I want to thank you, Alex and Julie, for joining us. You know, thank you for being here. And again, I know a lot of different links have been shared in the chat today. So please, if you have more questions or you're curious about learning more, please check those out. We are going to go into our reminders here. So as a reminder for those of you who may be experiencing a need, our 211 helpline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We maintain a running list of available services in the community and can connect you to the supports that you need. You can also look up resources in your area by using our 211 resource database at unitedwaysem.org/211. And this also includes mental health resources. So please don't hesitate to call or visit the website if you or someone you know is in need of help. Another reminder here about Sarah: on February 2nd at 1 p.m., United Way, together with the University of Michigan Poverty Solutions, will be launching our Financial Wellbeing Innovation Challenge. So this initiative aims to support and fund innovative ideas that will help Detroiters become more financially stable by breaking down systemic barriers to stability. The public is welcome and encouraged to join us for this kickoff event. Will be held virtually via Zoom and Facebook Live. You can learn more and register to attend at www.unitedwaysem.org/FWBIC, and we will be sharing the link in the chat here. So thank you for joining us today. We hope that you will join us on our next town hall and what's coming up. So next week, we're excited to be joined by the Detroit chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity to talk about the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And that's next Wednesday, January 19th at 10 a.m. You can sign up for updates for all the town halls, and including seeing our previous town halls or upcoming topics. So please visit www.unitedwaysem.org/virtual town halls. And the website is also included in the chat box. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and stay safe and continue to live united.